Ever wonder how traders spot smart money moves before the stock runs? Here's how to detect smart money moves in the options market with 5 steps. First one here is sweeps, where you look for large buy orders that hit multiple exchanges to get filled instantly. This suggests urgency in the market, and I'll show you an example here in a second. Second one is above ask premiums. If this is the case, you'll see normally a lot of gold orders tied to it, kind of like what you see here on Tesla. And this is a telltale sign that there's a lot of aggression following those buy orders. The third one here is large premiums. So if there's a high dollar value attached to it, typically I like to see over 500,000 to over $1 million, depending on the ticker. This suggests institutional involvement. And then 4 is the unusual out the money buying. If they're buying out the money calls or puts, that shows even more aggression and a lot more directional bias behind those orders, which is always a great sign, specifically if they have shorter dated expirations instead of something that's maybe a year plus, for example. And then the fifth one over here is repeat activity. So if the same strike and expiration is being bought across multiple days or in clusters, so in a row, we call them continuous prints, that is a telltale sign that there's a lot of smart money interest following it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you an example from Tesla as of this week, and this is something that is ongoing, so it will continue to appreciate based on the feedback we're seeing based on the flow. So Tesla is up about 15 or 17% at the time that I'm recording this. Yeah, 17.35% right now. And all week long, the whales have been adding a bunch of calls. You can see here just on the Twitter account how many calls they were buying. You can see millions upon millions of premium. A lot of these were above the ask, as I mentioned earlier in the video. That's kind of what we look for. Plus, a lot of them also had that far out the money, or at least out the money strike, as you can see here with like a 350, 370, etc. So what I want to do today is go over how to find these setups before they end up going a lot higher, because this is something that happens every single week on different tickers. Maybe not every day, but if you can catch one once a week, that can definitely pay dividends. So without further ado, here we go. I'm going to go over to Cheddar flow here, and specifically the historical flow tab, because I want to see all of the Tesla flow for this week. This is the week of June 9th to the 13th, and it's Wednesday, so it's the 11th. So we have 3 days of data so far at the time of me recording this. And once I decide where I want to start it from, so the start of the week, I can click search, and then I'll be on Tesla here. But automatically on Cheddar flow, you're typically going to be at 50,000 plus or more premium. What I like to do is filter for at least over 500,000 in premium to see where big money is sitting. What are they doing? Because personally, I don't really care much about a $50,000 order. That's not that much in the grand scheme of the market, especially for a ticker like Tesla. So I have it here for over 500,000 in premium. And what you'll first realize when looking at the historical flow for this week is we saw 79.4% calls versus only 20.6% puts. Automatically, that already shows there's a definite skew towards the bull side just based on this metric alone. Of course, now we need to dive into it a bit further, see what type of calls these were. Are these the ones we're looking for? Do they fit the 5 criteria I mentioned earlier on in this video? So what we'll do is we'll scroll all the way to the bottom to go to the start of the week, and we can start to scroll through and look for some interesting prints, both ends. This is going to be unbiased. I'm not trying to look for only call orders. I'm going to look for both ends of the spectrum here. And what I immediately noticed is early on in the week, so the start of the week here on Monday, the 9th of June, we can see that there was a consistent amount of calls hitting the tape, not quite over 1 million yet, but you can notice here 300. This is out the money with a short dated expiration, and the spot price at the time was 294.21, so that's why it's out the money. Then we had another one right after for 781,000. So this is already 1.5 million worth of premium between both of these orders for a little bit further of an expiration, but also has the same strike of 300. That's a good sign. A little bit later on over here, 295, also out the money for that 613 expiration again, so short dated. All of these, by the way, have volume, as you can see over here, is over the existing open interest for these contracts. So because we've seen all of these orders come throughout the day, this is a sign of buying. Normally you want to see the size of the order, the volume be over the open interest, but because we saw the collection of these and it is over the existing open interest, that is a clear sign of buying. They're opening these positions. Bought to open is what we call them. Another way you can look at it is based on the IV, but I'll get into that a little bit later in this video. But as I scroll up here, we can start to see even more money coming into here. The only difference between these orders here and these over here is really just the expiration and the strike. So the strike is super far out the money. Like this is rare, even for Tesla, which there's a lot of degenerate activity on to begin with, but 700 strike when it's trading at 294. That's a huge move that they'd be expecting, even if they didn't plan on waiting all the way for the strike to get hit. This is a massive move, and this is for the call leap expiration of 12/17/2027. So yes, I realize ideally you have something short dated, kind of like June, July, maybe even August behind some of these prints. However, because of how far these were out the money, even though it has a far dated expiration, this is a good sign to see these, especially when you complement it with other prints that are short dated. We're looking at a lot of smart money activity for these short dated strikes out the money as well. And then now we're looking at some more longer dated expirations along with it. So that's just overall a great sign. Plus, there's no puts around here. We just have a singular put order of a measly 783,000 for September of this year in a sea of complete green, as you can see around here. So that's a great sign as well. Clear bull bias throughout the entirety of that day for Monday of this week, with very aggressive orders as we continue down throughout the session. So those are two great signs. And whenever something like that crosses the tape during the day, I want to continuously see that as the week goes on, because that's a telltale sign that this is something that can have a lot of momentum. It can continue a lot higher. So as we scroll up from here, you can start to see some call selling. Really no interest in puts though. Even the reds up here, mainly call selling. Part of this is call monetization. Some of these were sold to open as well so they can collect the premium, but really no directional bearish activity. Again, great sign to see that when you're looking for a certain trade bias based on flow. You can see a pretty large call up here, split order, so it's tied to something else. And then as you can see, we have a massive $5.8 million 370 strike call for the December of 2026 expiration. So this is yet another leap over here. This one also has a very far out the money strike that they chose with a lot of premium, similar to what we saw back here with the 700 strikes. A lot of premium behind them. 700 super far out the money, also a leap order. So a lot of activity for further dated expirations on Tesla. Good sign for the long term. So I want to see, okay, bulls are really bullish on the long term. Are they going to consistently be bullish in the short term, kind of like we saw with those June and July contracts? So I want to see more of that later on this week. And we started to get more of that later on this week. You can see over here, 723,000 for that 300 strike again for the 6/13 expiration. A little bit later on, also over here, 524,000. So you're already over $1 million for that. Also, they rolled up this strike to 310 for the 6/13 expiration yet again. A lot more green up here, really no directional puts still. Hitting the tape, very bullish bias over here. Another one of those 6/13 orders for in the money strike, 1.2 million. And yeah, I realize it's in the money, but this is a collection of variety of different strikes and expirations, all bullish for the short term, which is exactly what I was looking for based on what we saw in the previous day for those longer dated strikes. So this is a great sign still, even though it is in the money. As we scroll up here, again, just mainly calls for the red. It's not anything that's directionally bearish in terms of puts. And you can see already another June, just for a week later for that June OpEx, 1 million in premium for the 300 strike. This one was above the ask, highlighted in gold here. You can see even more over here, 2.6 million, 2 million, etc. This is a lot of premium, guys, even for Tesla on a consistent basis when there's a very clear skew to that bull aspect. This isn't like we're looking at a 1 million call print and then a 1 million put print right after and just consistently back and forth. This is very clearly bullish based on the flow. It's very clear that smart money is bullish on this ticker. And of course, as we continue to go on throughout the week, there was more and more afterwards as price continued to appreciate. You could already see over here, we're at 320 versus before when I showed you we're at 300 or 295. And this has just been the case this entire week for this upside move of 17% in a mere 3 days of Tesla trading. This is after Tesla fell a bunch last week between the Trump and Musk feud. And this is just a classic example of a momentum setup based on flow. So really like how this one played out for this week. A lot of signs that flow gave us, as well as some technical signs. For example, if you remember in the weekly prep video on Sunday, I mentioned this blue trend line right here, this uptrend. It goes all the way back over to here from April of 2024. And you can see it's maintained it for a long time. We broke below during that correction, the tariff correction. Then we finally broke back above over here in May of 2025. And just recently we fell below it during the Trump/Elon scare. But based on this week's price action, you can see here, it actually was able to reclaim it We retested it intraday, and then it's been up ever since. So this is another way to use technicals. For example, if you see a ton of bullish flow like we saw on Monday, and this is Monday right here, guys, you see a bunch of bullish flow and you're interested, but you don't want to pull the trigger just yet, wait for the following day, see if it fits one of your technical criteria. For example, this trend line, do we break back above it? Can we hold it on the hourly, etc.? If it does, you already know from the day before there's a bullish sentiment from smart money. See if it continues the second day over here. Plus, does it fit your criteria in the technicals? It did all three of that on Tuesday of this week. And then enter the position. In this case here, even if you entered over here, you still get a huge chunk of this move, and it's probably going to continue from here, to be honest. I can see this going to 340 in a short amount of time, and then after that, it can continue up if it wants to. So that's the name of the game with flow. This is how you can track unusual flow on a daily basis to derive your own trade setups. Regardless, as always, appreciate you guys watching this video. I'll see you next time.